Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew Waterhouse, Director of the Robert Mondavi Institute and Professor of Enology. In partnership with the Cal Aggie Alumni Association, it's my privilege to welcome you to Sips and Bites Iron Brew. This evening, we're presenting UC Davis's brewing science students and their winning beer, Caledonian Nights. You'll get to hear about the process of producing an award-winning beer and the people who made it happen. First, I want to explain our new series, Sips and Bites, since tonight is only our second event. It was created to host relaxed and spontaneous conversations with UC Davis students, alumni, and other affiliates to tell the stories behind their craft, whether it's winemaking, beer brewing, honey tasting, or a culinary innovation. We get to learn what inspires them, as well as their innovations and aspirations. Over the next few months, we'll have a few upcoming events, which I'll mention later in the program. The Robert Mondavi Institute strives to engage the public with the wine, food, and beverage innovations here at UC Davis. We focus on the departments of viticulture and enology and food science and technology, but we include scholars and researchers in other areas of food to mix things up and make it more interesting. Tonight, we get to share with you a successful collaboration between students, faculty, and industry. This project truly exemplifies the department's goal for students to have expertise in science and technology, but to be able to demonstrate their independent creativity. We're very proud of the achievements and successes of our students in the brewing team. But now I'd like to thank the Cal Aggie Alumni Association for co-sponsoring tonight. And I'd like to hand it over to Dana Allen, Executive Director of the Cal Aggie Alumni Association, to say a few words. Dana.
Andrew, thank you for that introduction. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. As Andrew mentioned, I am the Executive Director of the Cal Aggie Alumni Association, and we're very proud to represent more than 260,000 alumni, parents, students, retirees, and emeriti worldwide. We're very thrilled to be part of tonight's collaboration with the Robert Mondavi Institute and look forward to doing more of these in the months and years to come. One of the special things that I can also offer that the Alumni Association is doing for those of you tonight and others around the world is that we're in the early stages of developing a beer club, which we think will tie in very nicely with the long history of the brewing program here at UC Davis, and hopefully spark your interest as alums, supporters of Robert Mondavi Institute, and of course, supporters of UC Davis. So be on the lookout for more information about how you can become involved, and of course, how you can partner with us on any of our events through the Cal Aggie Alumni Association as well. Again, thank you for joining us this evening. A special thank you to our alumni. And Andrew, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Dana. And also thank you for your partnership for being here with us tonight. Finally, I've got a few housekeeping items to cover. We'll be taking questions, so if you have questions for our speakers, please submit your questions via the Q&A option on the toolbar. Don't use the chat function. We won't be looking there for your question. Please use the Q&A function. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the program. Also, today's program will be accessible on demand in a few days, probably on Monday or Tuesday, through the RMI website. So please look there if you want to revisit the program or want to share it with your friends or family. Let them know they can find it there. So to get started, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest host, Professor Glenn Fox. Glenn is the Anheuser-Busch Endowed Professor of Malting and Brewing Sciences here at UC Davis. He has published more than 100 peer-reviewed book chapters and journal articles and is a leading authority on barley, malt, and beer quality. In 2018, he was elected Fellow of the Institute of Brewing and Distilling for his contributions to the malting and brewing industries. Glenn joined the faculty at UC Davis in 2019, succeeding Charlie Bamforth. Glenn will now introduce our guests. Glenn.
Thank you, Andrew, and certainly thank you, Dana, and the college for supporting the program. And I'd like to thank Linda Harris, who's chair of the Department of Food Science, for also supporting our program over many years. Tonight we're going to be going through a little bit of a history of the brewing program, because I'm sure many of our guests aren't aware of the long history of the brewing program at UC Davis. And we're going to talk to a couple of special people. One is Trenton Yaxan, who is co-owner of Sudwork. So if Trenton can pop on and say hi. We also have two students who were part of the team that actually designed the recipe and then brewed the beer, the winning beer. So I might actually go through a bit of the history of the program. For those that aren't aware, the brewing program has had a long history at UC Davis. Way back in the 1950s, a brewing company in San Francisco wrote to Dr. Emil Marak, who was then chair of the Department of Food Science. So food science has always been the home for the brewing program. And Reuben Schneider, who was president, outlined that the industry needed more trained people coming into the brewing industry. Of course, that was a great idea, and Dr. Marak thought, well, why not? We've got to support this. But the university didn't have any brewing equipment. So, of course, they needed to get some brewing equipment. So the brewing company itself, as well as the Master Brewers Association, donated some equipment. And that kickstarted the program back in 1958. And a name that some of the guests might recall is Dr. Herman Pfaff, where the Pfaff collection is named after. He was actually the first to teach the brewing courses. And then Dr. Nakayama took over. And it wasn't until the 1960s that Professor Michael Lewis came on board as the first brewing professor. And it was Professor Lewis that designed the current brewing courses that we have and the courses that the students do as part of the Iron Brew. So Dr. Lewis designed FST 102 and 102L at the time, which was the laboratory. And this is basically the foundation of the brewing program. After Professor Lewis's retirement, Charlie Bamforth came on board, and Charlie really immersed himself in the brewing program. And he realized that the brewing facilities had been around for quite a while, and there was time to upgrade these facilities. So his close friendship with a number of brewing companies, he convinced Anheuser-Busch and also his friend Ken Grossman up at Sierra Nevada to make significant financial contributions to help the program. And it really did help the program when some fantastic equipment was purchased. The new brewery was actually installed at Cruise Hall. So many of the guests will remember Cruise Hall. I still haven't been to Cruise Hall. I've been here a year and I still haven't been over to Cruise Hall. Anyway, the equipment was moved to the new RMI facility, the big pilot facility adjacent to the wine facility, as well as the food processing plant in 2010. In addition, there was a new food science and brewing laboratory installed within the Robert Mondavi South Wing. This really kick-started the brewing program, and the students could really immerse themselves, but the pilot facility was quite large and really wasn't suited to small-scale brewing that the students would be doing. So another great supporter of the program, Doug and Julie Moorman, donated 4 small nano breweries, and also Carlos Alvarez from Gambrinus has also supported the program with a number of important investments for us in terms of equipment. The interesting thing that from Doug and Julie Moorman's, their 4 small nano breweries each have a name, and the boys might talk about the name of the brewery they worked on for their Iron Brew winning recipe. And actually the nano breweries are named after Doug and Julie's dogs, which is quite a good story. We've talked a little bit about the nano brewery, so we do actually have a video showing the brewery itself. And I will say that the brewery is probably the lead teaching and research brewery in the USA. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from here. So coming in from the outside, I knew how good this program was to start with. And you see through the video how spectacular the brewery really is. So Dan, can we show that video? So this is where coming into the brewery itself, the first thing we'll see is the hot side of the brewery. There's some the fermenters that are all important, certainly for the students. The pilot brewery is around about 1.5 barrels, or in the metric world, about 180 litres. And it is equivalent to a commercial brewery. We can do everything a commercial brewery can do. These are the small nano breweries, and you can see the names on the side there. So this is one of the breweries that the students would have used. We love to see the copper. Copper's more of a visual thing in breweries now. Everything's basically stainless steel. It's certainly much easier to clean. One of the great investments, and this is thanks to Carlos Alvarez and Gambrinas, is this set of 16 small fermenters, which the students use as part of their Nano Brew program. These small fermenters allows us to do a range of different fermentations simultaneously, and that's a great contribution to the program. So Charlie Bamforth is a legend in the industry, and he has a great name and great friendships with many people. And certainly Ken Jackson at Sierra Nevada has been a great supporter of the program. And to that end, Ken and his wife donated a significant amount of money and created the Sierra Nevada Endowed Brewer. And Joe Williams received that. He was the first recipient of that. And Joe is an important part of our brewing program and certainly the brewing class. So the FST 102L became FST 102B. And that program went on for decades. And even though the students were brewing beers, it was all internally judged. There was no external judging going on. In about 2007, this is when the first lot of external judges came on board. And then it took a new level of seriousness. Also, this is when the Iron Brew name came about. So the former brewery manager, I spoke with Charlie about this. We think with the name Iron Brew after the television show Iron Chef. So it's appropriate. This is a tough competition. So this is how the Iron Brew came about. If we jump forward to 2015, this is when we really see the expansion of the 102B, the Iron Brew, and this is the first collaboration with Sudwork. This was the first year that the winning recipe was brewed at Sudwork. And this is, I think, a standout for the program. Certainly, we think it's the only brewing program in the world where we have a competition for students, and then the winning recipe is brewed as a commercial beer by the students. So if anyone knows of any other program, happy to hear about it, but I think this makes this program very special. So the 2015 winning team actually included Joe Williams, who was the Sierra Nevada Endowed Brewer. Joe was actually an employee at Sudwork before he became the Sierra Nevada Endowed Brewer. But also our other partner in crime is Kelly Scott. Kelly was also a brewer at Sudwork. Kelly also did the brewing program here at Davis before she returned to Davis from Sudworks. So in the last few minutes, I have talked a lot about our partnership and collaboration with Sudworks. So it's appropriate now I bring in Trenton, who is co-owner and as a big supporter of our program. How are you going, Trenton?
Doing great. Thanks so much, Glenn.
Can you share with us some of your experiences and working with the Iron Brew teams over the years?
Absolutely. Appreciate the introduction there. And again, I second everything Glenn has mentioned about all the people involved in making this happen, from the the Robert Mondavi Institute to the Cal Aggie Alumni Association and the brewing department, the whole College of Ag and the marketing communications. It was really a big team effort behind the scenes. So appreciate the opportunity to work with everybody and put this beer in cans for the first time, especially with all the uncertainty going on in the world. So thank you everyone for helping us get this through. I'm Trent Yaxon. I'm the operations manager here at Sudwork in Davis. I'm going on about 10 years now. Definitely exciting position, lots of challenges. I get to see from a high level how not just Sudwork works, but the greater beer industry. So always something going on, and I can never complain working in the beer industry. Sudwork itself, a lot of people ask the correct pronunciation. In the German pronunciation is Sudwerk, or Southern Factory. is the direct translation, but it's also a slang term for a community brewery, which we've taken to heart, and we're a big part of the Davis community. Give back as much as we can. Big partners with UC Davis. A lot of people also call it Studworks. That's kind of been the name that's been adopted over the years, and we're okay with that too. We say it all works as long as you're drinking Studwork beer. We're good with it. It was originally started by my grandpa, Dean Unger, back in 1989. He was an architect in Sacramento, and his business partner, Ron Brower, was a contractor, and they started the brewery in their 60s really as a hobby. They wanted to essentially create the highest quality craft beer. I don't think the word craft was related to beer was really defined yet. So they were pioneers in this region. And so they created, they both had German heritage. They traveled Bavaria. They brought back a German replica brew house, German recipes, and down to the German brewmeister, Carl Eden, who was the original brewer here in the early 90s. And they saw a lot of success in the early years. They were the #1 brew pub in North America for the first few years. And they also started that relationship with UC Davis early on as well in the mid 90s, which I'll get back to in a minute. Currently we brew close to about 10,000 barrels a year. Barrels are measured basically 31 gallons is one barrel, or 2 full-size kegs. It's a barrel. So it's upwards of about 300,000 gallons per year. So that puts us in I'd say the top 100 breweries in California for sure. Compared to the much bigger breweries, craft breweries, the big dogs, Sierra Nevada and Sam Adams, they're in the millions of barrels. And then even bigger, the macro global brewers, those guys are spilling more beer than we're brewing in a year. So they're big time. So we're really we consider more of a microbrewery. It's gotten a lot more competitive over the past 10 years. That's a definite. I think when I started, there was maybe 8 breweries in Sacramento, and now we're up to I think close to 100 within the region, and over 1,000 in California. So again, it's hyper competitive, but definitely keeps us on our toes and keeps us motivated to keep growing the brand and doing the best we can. We've won pretty much every major award over the past 30 years. We are the most established brewery in the Sacramento region, starting in 1989 now. From the Great American Beer Fest to the World Beer Cup. So really high quality beers. We take a lot of pride in the beer we're putting out, and especially, our brewers are really highly trained technically. A lot of them went through the UC Davis program, so they're getting the best teaching in the world. So definitely, again, strong ties to UC Davis have helped us, continue to become ultimately a global leader in beer production. Our best-selling beer right now is our Pilsner. We specialize in primarily lager beers, so longer fermentation time, really committed to the lager, also redefining what people think about the American lager. Over time, over the past few years, we have broadened our portfolio. We're doing, we are doing ales now, IPAs. Can't not do an IPA in today's world. It is the top-selling beer style in America and the craft world still. Mixed fermentation, sour, barrel-aged beers, and we're even starting to dabble in the hard seltzer as well. That's another category that's been growing a lot, especially in the past couple of years. But still, our #1 brand is Pilsner, and that's about 60% of our production. The opportunity to get involved in the brewery. I grew up in Davis. I grew up around the brewery. About 10 years ago, my grandpa, and Ron were considering closing the brewery during the last recession. And myself and my business partner, Ryan Fry, who's also a Davis local, we saw the opportunity to get involved and help them figure out what to do next. And one of the biggest reasons and opportunities we saw to keep the brand going was all the equity built over the years, especially with former UC Davis students and alumni. The brand had built so many great emotional connections that I had myself growing up around the brewery. So it was something we really were proud to step up and carry on the family legacy and into the next generation. So now in the 3rd generation, as clearly aside from the family legacy and back to the UC Davis connection, we also have on-site continuing education brewing programs that were originally the relationship was started with Michael Lewis, Dr. Michael Lewis, back in 1995 with, I believe, Ron or my grandpa, and they're still a tenant on site. And the idea then was to put the classroom next to a working commercial brewery. And so we are still closely tied to them. It's the first 6 months of every year. And since people from all over the world to come out as an accredited brewmaster, essentially. And our head brewer, Tom Stoll, who also went through the program, he co-teaches, and we give them a window into the commercial operating brewery right next to the classroom. So it's been a great relationship. We definitely want to continue. And of course, with the undergrad now, when we started working with them more in 2013 is around the time we bought the brewery. We raised money. We were fortunate from family and also UC Davis alumni to purchase the brewery. And Glenn mentioned his name, but Doug Molman, he's actually one of our investors as well. He's been a huge key to our success and continuing on with the Sudwork brand. And he's really just an all-around champion when it comes to beer in the beer industry. His career was at Anheuser-Busch until he retired. And so we're really fortunate to have him on the team and access to his knowledge in brewing some of the best lagers on the planet. So we back to the Iron Brew. We did solidify and continue to grow that 2015, as Glenn mentioned. Joe Williams, who's now the Sierra Nevada endowed brewer on campus, he did one the first year, and from that, over time, we've grown it. We were formerly selling it in draft keg beer only, releasing it in our tap room, and then the big part of it that we wanted to tie into the brewing side of it was also the sales, the marketing, how to package and take this beer to market, the concept behind creating the story and really hand selling it to the accounts. And so taking all the way through and actually taking the students out with our wholesalers, teaching about the 3-tier network of brewery to distributor to retailer, and going out and letting them get that experience as well, which has been rewarding for us to see. It's, from what we understand, it's helped some of the former Iron Brew champions obtain jobs as well, putting this on the resume. So that's been huge. So this is the first year we put it in cans, which was a huge success. We did sell out very quickly, especially once the email started going out through the RMI and the California Alumni Network. So thank you all so much for supporting it during a really uncertain time. And moving forward, I think we're going to most likely brew a bigger batch size. We can talk about that a little further. Glenn can chime in too. We are going to have about, it looks like maybe 14 cases left. We had put some beer in draft kegs that once we realized how well the package was selling, we decided to instead transfer that beer from the keg back to package. So we're just waiting on labeling those, which should happen next week. And so we'll probably put that link to purchase up back on our Sudwork Brew website by tomorrow. And if anyone out there didn't get any or is still interested in wanting more, just look to our website by tomorrow morning. It should be up. So with all that said, I think I'll pass it back to Glenn, and happy to answer any other questions on this open forum, and look forward to hearing the students, their perspective as well. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Trenton. And I can predict that those beers will be sold very quickly. So Trenton's given us a great background of the brewery itself and their relationship to the program. We do have two of our students from the winning team, Andres and Charlie, if they would like to join us now. And one thing I certainly want to point out, that over many years, all the Iron Brew winning teams have had students that are food science students. This has been an important part of the food science program. So it's great to see that the food science students really enjoy and embrace the brewing program. Good afternoon, Andres and Charlie. How are you this afternoon?
Doing quite well, quite well.
Quite well. Nearly time for beer, I think.
Oh,
I agree.
But before we do, some questions. You don't get out of it that easy.
shucks.
So what drew you to Davis? Why did you want to study food science at Davis?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
So I've always been really interested in both food and science. I worked at a restaurant in Oakland called Homestead for a number of years, starting in high school. And so I've also loved science for a long time. And so for me, it was a pretty natural progression to take both of those interests and go into food science.
Well, I think for myself, well, just like Charlie, food and science are a big interest. I feel more drawn towards chemistry. So having an option to study food science in particular at UC Davis is, well, I'd say it's a pretty good deal. So after a few years in a different science field in physics, I transferred over to food science and technology because I felt like it would be a little more appropriate for my interests.
Cool. And as you're going through the food science program, what drew you to the brewing program?
Well, I say for the number one thing that really drew me to the brewing program was just studying fermentation as a whole. I was lucky enough to be invited to the fourth International Conference of Fermented Foods at Davis. And after being able to participate and hear all the different inputs from the fermentation leaders in the local area, it was almost a shoo-in. I felt like it was calling to me the entire time.
I think that beer really exemplifies what food science is, because you start with these base ingredients, just malt, hops, yeast, and through tons of different options and different processing steps, you can create this wide array of products, fermented products, from like the light lagers that Sudwork makes to Caledonian Nights that we made.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So also great opportunity to talk about your beer. So as part of the Iron Brew or the 102B course, you start with a practice brew and then you get to design your own recipe. How about you take us through that process?
Yeah, the first beer that we brewed was, I think it was a pale ale. And we had that recipe just given to us and we all followed that. And then from there, the second beer we made was an ESB, which is another dark British beer. So we're obviously pretty interested in that sort of style of beer, that area. And so it was a lot of fun to get to try these two different types of brewing and making these very different products.
Right. And I feel prior to this experience in the actual practical brewing course, I had little to no experience with brewing. So kind of getting thrust into the program was pretty shocking, and it was very intimidating, I must say, for the initial brew that we had to make, even if it was just from a recipe that was pre-made.
Sure. I understand completely.
For me, I'd actually done a little bit of home brewing myself. My neighbor has a whole home brew setup that I got to borrow and try out. But it was a whole next level experience getting to use the brew setups over there, because there's pumps, there's the glycol chilled, temperature controlled fermenters, which was quite a pleasure to use.
Sure. So after then, you had to start to work on your own recipes. So what motivated you, what inspired you to develop a recipe for Scottish ale?
So I think since our team was composed of 4 people, 4 students, and we all were pretty familiar with at least food chemistry at that point, our goal was to kind of settle down on a style, which we thought would, bring us gold for the Iron Brew Championship. We kind of just thought about the different types of beers that we've had and experienced in the past. And the first objective was to settle on a style. After that, it was trying to figure out which ingredients we're going to use to try and match that style, and trying to acquire the desired characteristics of that beer.
Yeah, and part of what went into that decision of what style to make was what would be something that stands out from the crowd. And like you guys talked about earlier, IPAs are sort of the thing. And there were a number of IPAs brewed by our competitors. And so we went for a Scottish export ale, which is pretty different, I think, in the craft beer scene right now. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to do something different.
Sure. And we were talking about this earlier, and how going through the judging process, and the judges are very familiar with styles of beer, and they would be looking for something that's true to style. You can certainly be adventurous, and craft brewing is basically innovation brewing. Brewers are looking for something different, being innovative, trying to add something that is a little bit different, but still can make good quality beer. But I think the comments from the judges was how true to style your beer was. And I think that certainly contributed to the success that you had.
Thank goodness for that too.
Yeah, and I can recall the look on your faces when they were announcing the winners. And from our perspective, the staff, to see how happy the teams were when they win, that's a great reward. So after you win, then discussions start with Trenton and Ryan and the Sudwork team, and you had to get over to the brewery to actually do some brewing. How did you find that experience?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was a really cool time. Like, it was well into the COVID situation, so we had to do it in 2 stages. So Aton and Andres went in for the first part of the brew, and then myself and Paul came in for the second part, and it was cool.
I gotta say, it was really shocking though, to see how many different steps there were in as soon as you start scaling up the brew into something that's a larger scale. And it was very, it would have been more intimidating, but since we were working with a really experienced head brewer, Tom, he made it seem like it was nothing. He was really familiar with local ingredients, thankfully, because we wanted to make, first we wanted to make a really delicious beer, but second, we also wanted to use some of the resources we had here in California to create that product. And so, you know, without Tom's help, it probably wouldn't have been as possible.
Sure. And there was a slight change in the name that happened between the Iron Brew competition and the beers that's been sold today. So just give us a little bit of story about the name you selected. And then Andres, I think you were involved in designing the label.
Right. I had designed the original label. It was actually called Armor Ale initially during the actual competition. But with some help from the team at Sudwork, they helped us learn a little bit more about the individual we had named it after. Initially, Armor Ale was named after a Mr. Philip Danforth Armour, an American entrepreneur who founded Armour and Company Meatpacking in Chicago. But after a few considerations, we decided that maybe we should change the name to something a little bit more wholesome. So we scrapped the name, we refurbished the label, and but our goal was to still capture the elements of the beer in that same new label. So we decided to switch from Armor Ale to Caledonian Nights, the one that you see on the package now. So our goal was to, since this is a really uncommon beer, we wanted to kind of inform the consumers what they would be drinking. So Caledonian Nights is a little riff on Arabian Nights, the folk tales. A lot of customers recognize this motif, and it's really nostalgic. If you're not familiar, then Caledonia is a kind of a fantastical Roman era Scotland. It gives a pretty good idea of where the style originates. So if you get the play on words, then it gives you a little bit of a history lesson while you're just reading the label.
I think that's an excellent point to make, is for craft brewers, having a story to tell about the beer. You can come up with some fanciful names and it might just be a fanciful name, but if you can actually wrap a story around the beer or the name of the beer, I think it adds so much more value to the beer itself.
We found that particularly useful when we went around talking to various possible sales that we were going to make, because if you get to talk to someone and give them a good story, then they're much more likely to be interested in the product you're selling.
Sure. So we probably should taste the beer. The guests may already be drinking their Caledonian Night, but I haven't had one for a week, so I'm going to have another one tonight. And Trenton might like to come back and join us as we taste our beers. So there we go. There's that nice fresh sound. And if you're having your beer, have it in a glass. And that's all part of the sensory experience. So we'll just pour our beers, and as part of this process, there's a few things going on. We want to be able to see the colour of the beer. In most beers, you're looking for some clarity. So how clear is the beer? And then the foam. So can you tell us a bit more about what we would expect in this style of beer? Andre,
All right.
Charlie?
So with this style, our goal is to really, we want the maltiness and we want the flavor of your, ideally your local barley, to really pop. That was our objective. It's not too bitter. The aroma isn't super intense. We really want those bready, nutty, caramel flavors to pop out.
Yeah,
And we would probably describe that more as a malt forward flavour. So there's not overwhelming bitterness, and the actual bitterness of your beer is on the lowish scale. What's the bitterness of your beer? Can you recall?
Oh, right. If you're familiar with the IBUs, then our original brew was 31 IBUs, which is relatively low for the modern culture, at least.
Yes. Definitely not in the IPA scale.
Yeah.
So where's the colour coming from? This is a little bit on the dark side. So where's the colour coming from? Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
Well, we used, the majority of the malt is just a base pale malt. And then we used a small percentage of, it was Gallagher's.
Right.
Yeah, Gallagher's something, which gives us this lovely dark amber color. I believe there's also some caramel, caramel 120, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So you really taste that. It's not overwhelming. It's just a nice balance between the malt flavors and the hop. And that was the important point for the judges. It was very true to style.
And I think the majority of the malt too also came from Admiral Maltings, and the owner Ron, he was one of the judges as well. And that I think it was 92% of the grain, Bill, came from Admiral, and most of that grain was grown. Actually, all of it was grown in Yolo County, which was a great local tie-in as well.
Yeah, and Gallagher was actually Lynn Gallagher. He was the barley breeder here at UC Davis. So the variety is actually named after the first barley breeder, Lynn Gallagher. So there is a really close connection. It goes much deeper than we think, it's a great story.
Awesome.
So I hope everyone's enjoying their beer. We have to allow time for Q&A. But before we do that, I think I've got to hand back to Dana, and she's going to make an announcement.
My pour is not as good as yours, Glenn. I am not as skilled. Well, Trent, I was so excited to hear you share that more of this will be in production, because I have the privilege now of announcing a giveaway that we're going to be doing for people in attendance. And so what we're going to be giving away are 4 $25 gift cards to Sudwork. And that way, for those of you who are in California, you'll be able, if not to drive by, then order online and enjoy some of what we've been hearing about tonight. For those of you, excuse me, not in California, unfortunately, we can't quite ship out of state yet. However, there is a great array of Sudwork swag that you can also purchase online, hats, t-shirts, so you can really carry this brand forward if you don't happen to be in the Davis area. So the way we're gonna do this is I'm gonna call upon Glenn, then Charlie, then Andreas, excuse me, and Trenton. And if each of you will give me a number between 1 and 90, we're going to look at our list of registrations. And if the number they call aligns with your name, we'll be in touch with you to get additional information on how we can make sure you get your gift card in hand. So Glenn, I'll let you start us off first. What's your number?
Oh, I might start with my birth year, 64.
64. Okay, Charlie.
16.
16. Okay, Andreas. Oh, excuse me. Trenton and Andreas.
Let's go 31.
31. Okay.
All right.
Andre, sorry?
70.
70. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. And again, great program. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Dana. And I think there's some questions coming in. And I think you did actually provide an answer to that question. Why name Caledonian Nights? What other names did you try? Well, I think Andres gave a really good explanation of picking that name. And what does the export in Scottish export ale mean? Was it different style for the domestic consumption in Scotland?
Yeah, there's a number of Scottish beers. I believe that the export was at some point exported to outside of Scotland, and it had just some slight different benchmarks for alcohol, color, and things like that.
Often the export products were hopped slightly differently because they would have been traveling on a ship, and the hops certainly contributed to preserving the beer. And often they might have been slightly higher alcohol as well. This is probably a question for Trenton. Someone's always been curious about the process of scaling up a beer, say from 5-gallon iron brew version to the 15-barrel version at Sudworth. Can the ingredients be scaled 1-to-1, or are there considerations on the larger volumes?
That's a great question. And our head brewer, Tom, he really takes lead on leading them through the process of scaling up every time. But for the most part, he looks at he starts with the specific gravity they're trying to hit, and looks at the percentage of ingredients and then scales it up accordingly. He looks, a big part of what he's always doing is looking at the recipe and what the ingredients call for, and then looking at our supplier partners to see if we can get those from the current vendors we're working with. If not, he'll try and find just the highest quality, best vendor to work with. For this specific instance, we were fortunate to be able to work with pretty much all the vendors have a UC Davis connection, which is another cool tie-in for the story, from Ron Silverstein, the owner at Admiral, where the malt was processed in Alameda County, to Chris White, owner and founder of White Labs, who was a UC Davis grad in the early 90s, now has built probably the biggest, he's probably the biggest producer in the world for craft breweries for liquid yeast. So, and then with hops, we were able to source from Steiner Company, which we do already order some hops from them. And their sales representative was actually formerly the head brewer at Sudworth, and he was also one of the Iron Brew judges, and he went through the UC Davis Master Brewers program. So it's definitely, Tom uses specific percentages he follows in the recipe, and then scales it up from there to make sure it meets the specs of our brew house compared to the smaller brew house at UC Davis, and teaches the students how to do it. Did Tom take you guys through how he scaled it up as well?
Right. He told us in theory that if you scale up the recipe 1-to-1, it should be okay, but there's a lot of other flaws in the plan that really come into play, like mashing efficiency. Like if you have a different setup, like the one at Sudworth versus the one that we have in the pilot brew house, the efficiency is far improved. So sometimes you don't need as much hops, or you don't need as much malt.
Thank you very much, guys. Couple more questions, and this might be for everyone. What was the most difficult part of the whole process? So I guess starting with Andres and Charlie, and starting with your Iron Brew, what was the most difficult part for you?
I guess just getting the recipe right, and choosing the right variation to submit to the judges, because we brewed 2 Scottish ales and we ended up choosing the first one to submit for the competition, and that ended up working well. But we easily could have gone the other way and maybe it wouldn't have worked out for us.
I found that one of the most difficult parts of the process was probably corrective action. Since it takes so long to brew a batch of beer, we could try making our recipe one time, and then it could turn out completely unexpected from what we had planned. As much as you do the calculations on paper, the actual product you get can be greatly different than what you expected. So when you have a limited time frame, or you have a plan to release on a certain day, then you really got to just plan as much as you can and hope for the best. A lot of uncertainty in brewing.
Sure. And Trenton, you know that the Iron Brew is coming up every year, but part of that decision for you to brew is the style of beer and then how you fit that in your schedule. And I know the 2019 winner was a very different style. So do you want to quickly talk about how you deal with that?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'd say the uncertainty this year was probably the most difficult part, and knowing whether or not we were actually going to be able to pull it off was up in the air for a while with everything going on behind COVID. Yeah, and it's pretty much been plug and play in years past, and we always plan on doing it in the springtime right after the winner is announced, after the judging happens in May, and we just know that we can sell most of it through our tap room on site, serving it to patrons that come into our tasting room called the Dock Store. But yeah, this year with all bars and restaurants closed, we were, and having never put this beer in package before, we were in uncharted waters, knowing that we wanted to make sure we executed this beer in line with what meeting UC Davis and everyone's expectations involved. So not knowing whether or not it was gonna, how it was gonna sell and packaged for the first time was definitely just led to some sleepless nights. But after we pulled it all together and executed, I think we have a new template to follow for years going forward, and we'll just plan on putting in the schedule every late spring, midsummer release.
Sure. And certainly the outreach through the alum as well as RMI was a great opportunity to sort of go much bigger.
Absolutely. That was definitely key to the success. So we definitely want to keep it going as long as everyone does.
Sounds good. One more question for Andres and Charlie. What was the most memorable moment of the Iron Brew competition for you guys?
Well, I think as nerve-wracking, I should say, as the actual judging process was, and listening to the feedback we got from all of these professional judges, I think one of the most exciting bits was really just tasting a lot of beer that the other students had already made and put together. It was really nice being able to experience the creativity of your classmates who had gone through the process with you.
Yeah, I completely agree. There was about an hour while the judging was going on that we just all hung out, tried a bunch of beers, and that was a lot of fun. But also just the moment when we heard that our beer was chosen, of course.
Sure. And there's a good team support you during that process, and they're as excited as you when we actually hear the winners.
Mm-hmm.
Now, final question for Trenton, and I think we've had the answer to this, but I suspect you'll get this question a bit more. Could you brew some more, please?
That's a great question. I think just keeping with the spirit of the Iron Brew every year, I think we'll just brew the beer one time each year, moving forward as we have. I think in moving forward and looking ahead, we'll probably brew a bigger batch. We brewed up based on a 15-barrel system. So in theory, 30 kegs. We end up losing some beer through process, but potentially doing 2 brews of that. So we end up with closer to 30 barrels moving forward. And just so we have more to go around than this time for sure.
Cool. So one question I can probably answer, how many teams compete in this? Well, this is part of an undergraduate course, and we normally have 30 to 36 students in the course. They've got to have done a prerequisite theory course. They will split up into two teams of 3 or 4. So we normally end up with 9, 10 teams. This is in the winter. And then the judging actually happens in the last week of the winter quarter, normally. We brought it forward a week this year, luckily. When we were planning this, we didn't know that a certain thing was going to occur and have such an impact, because the very next week, campus was basically shut. So we were a bit lucky to get away with it this year. And depending on what beer style people are making, it can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. So Andres and Charlie, how long did it actually take to make your Iron Brew winning beer in the pilot brewery?
Well, I have the original recipe right here next to me. Thank goodness. It took us 216 hours and then some to make that recipe in particular.
Cool. And you would have been popping in from time to time to be checking on that?
Yeah, 3 to 4 times a week.
Cool. Yep. Yep. It's not like a lot of processes where you just put it in the cupboard or put it in a barrel and forget about it for a few years. This is an ongoing, constant caretaking process.
Right. But if you do that, you probably still could get beer.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions. No, hang on. No, more coming in. Aggies love beer. Make some more. Oh dear, this is going to be hard, Trenton. We've had a question asked about expanding the Iron Brew competition to compete against other schools. This is always an interesting thing to discuss. Yes, it's a possibility. But then that's a lot of work. It is a lot of effort. And particularly in the case of the Iron Brew, most often the students are finished by the time these sorts of things could happen. So I know Andres has graduated. Charlie, not yet, but at the end of this year, he'll graduate. So basically the team has gone. The team has left the campus. So it is challenging. We have had discussions over years about, do we set up a campus-wide, university-wide competition? No, probably not. I think we'll just stick with what we do well, and we'll do Iron Brew. What kind of glass is best for this beer? Somebody's noticed several different shapes of glasses we use today. Trent, what would you suggest we drink this beer in?
Well, I'm drinking it today out of, we call this honest pint glass.
Just move that a little bit. Move it over. There we go. There we go.
It's got a little more body to it than your standard shaker pint, which isn't as good for stacking, and there's more breakage, but this is a good one. It really showcases the foam on the beer, and it almost fits the entire pint. We call it an honest pint because it actually fits 20 ounces instead of 16, where a lot of bars out there, you might not be getting a full 16 ounce. So I'm drinking it out of this one. You notice when I poured it, it had a nice foam on this top rim here. So really a glass that really showcases the foam. That's what I chose.
Sure, and a wide open mouth glass where you can get more of the aroma. And it's not uncommon to see judges sticking their nose well and truly into a beer glass to get that full effect of the aroma. Well, that's all the questions we have. Thank you, guys. It's been great extracting some more detail from you and presenting the story of the Iron Brew and your experiences through Sudworks Brewery. We again thank Trenton and his company for the support they offer the program. We look forward to Iron Brew 2021. Fingers crossed we can come back onto campus. We're not sure yet, but hopefully we can come back onto campus. So I'll say good evening to you guys, but before we go, Andrew needs to sign off and has a few final remarks. So over to you, Andrew.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you so much, you guys. It's been really a lot of fun. I have to have another taste before you go. And thank you too to Dana for adding some extra fun to the program. That was really great. We hope you and your friends really enjoy the evening as much as I did. As you check out, please respond to our survey or answer when you get the email in a few days. As I mentioned earlier, we have some upcoming lectures, all of them virtual, of course. On September 9th, we'll host another Sips and Bites with Sola Bee Farms, and they'll be speaking about sustainable beekeeping. Then we have a forum lecture for October 8th on how genetics is a powerful tool in viticulture research with Professor Dario Cantu and Dr. Mariana Fasoli from E&J Gallo. On October 14th, we have our fourth Sips and Bites. We'll talk to Napa Valley winemakers and UCD alum Jill and Steve Mathiasen. And you'll be hearing about this in your emails, so don't ignore emails from the Robert Mondavi Institute. And also to keep abreast of what's happening, please check us out on Facebook, because you'll get notices when our events come up, but also you'll be able to hear about some interesting things that are going on campus. So it's an interesting way to stay in touch. Thanks so much for attending this evening. I hope to see you at an event in the near future, and good night.